yelling his head off. In that moment, Beverly looked every inch the lovely woman she was going to become, and if Ben Hanscom had been around to see her just then, his heart might not have been able to stand it. She was standing fully upright, her head cocked to the left, her eyes wide, her hair done in braids that had been tied off with two small red velvet bows which she had bought at Dolly's for a dime. Her posture was one of total attention and concentration. It was feline, lynx-like. She had shifted forward on her left foot, her body half turned as if to go after Patrick, and the legs of her faded shorts had pulled up enough to show the edging of her yellow cotton panties. Below them, her legs were already smoothly muscled, beautiful in spite of the scabs, bruises, and smutches of dirt. "It's a trick. He saw you, and he knows he probably can't catch you in a fair chase, so he's trying to get you to come out. Don't go, Bevy." But another part of her thought there was too much pain and fear in those screams. She wished she had seen whatever had happened to Patrick, if anything had, more clearly. She wished more than anything else that she had come into the Barrens a different way and missed the whole crazy shenanigans. Patrick's screams stopped. A moment later, Beverly heard someone speak, but she knew that had to be her imagination. She heard her father say hello and goodbye. Her father wasn't even in Derry that day. He had set off for Brunswick at 8 o'clock. He and Joe Tamerley were going to pick up a Chevy truck in Brunswick. She shook her head as if to clear it. The voice didn't speak again. Her imagination, obviously. She walked out of the bushes to the path, ready to run the instant she saw Patrick charging at her, her reactions on triggers as delicate as a cat's whiskers. She looked down at the path, and her eyes widened. There was blood here, quite a lot of it. "Fake blood," her mind insisted. "You can buy a bottle of it at Dolly's for 49 cents. Be careful, Betty." She knelt and quickly touched the blood with her fingers. She looked at them closely. It wasn't fake blood. There was a flash of heat in her left arm just below the elbow. She looked down and saw something that she first thought was some kind of burr. No, not a burr. Burrs didn't twitch and flutter. This thing was alive. A moment after that, she realized it was biting her. She struck it hard with the back of her right hand, and it spattered, spraying blood. She backed up a step, getting ready to scream now that it was over. And then she saw that it wasn't over at all. The thing's featureless head was still on her arm, its snout buried in her flesh. With a shrill cry of disgust and fear, she picked it off and saw its proboscis come out of her arm like a small dagger, dripping with blood. She understood the blood on the path now, oh yes, and her eyes went to the refrigerator. The door had swung closed and latched again, but a number of parasites had been left outside and were crawling sluggishly over the rusty white porcelain. As Beverly looked, one of them unfurled its membranous fly-like wings and buzzed toward her. She acted without thinking, loading one of the steel ball bearings into the cup of the bullseye and pulling the sling back. As the muscles of her left arm flexed smoothly, she saw loose blood squirt from the hole the thing had made in her arm. She let fly anyway, unconsciously leading the flying thing. Shit, missed, she thought as the bullseye snapped and the ball bearing flew, a glittering chunk of light in the hazy sun. And she would later tell the other losers that she knew she had missed it, the same way a bowler knows he has missed the strike as soon as a bad ball leaves his hand. But then she saw the ball bearing curve. It happened in a split second, but the impression was very clear. It had curved. It struck the flying thing and splattered it to mush. There was a shower of yellowish droplets which pattered on the path. Beverly backed up slowly at first, her eyes huge, her lips trembling, her face a shocked grayish white. Her gaze was pinned to the front of the discarded refrigerator, waiting to see if any of the other things would smell or sense her. But the parasites only crawled slowly back and forth, like autumn flies drugged with the cold. At last she turned and ran. Panic beat darkly against her thoughts, but she would not give in to it entirely. She held the bullseye in her left hand and looked back over her shoulder from time to time. There was still blood dappled brightly on the path and on the leaves of some of the bushes bordering it, as if Patrick had woven from side to side as he ran. Beverly burst out into the area of junked cars again. Ahead of her there was a bigger splash of blood, just beginning to soak into the gravelly earth. The ground looked disturbed, darker streaks of earth lined into the powdery white surface, as if there had been a struggle there. Two grooves, about 2.5 feet apart, led away from the spot. Beverly halted, panting. She looked at her arm and was relieved to see that the flow of blood was finally slowing, although her lower forearm and the palm of her hand were streaked and tacky with it. The pain had begun now, a low, steady throb. It felt the way her mouth felt about an hour after the dentist's, when the Novocaine began to wear off. She looked behind again, saw nothing, then looked back at those grooves leading away from the junked cars, away from the dump, and into the barrens. Those things were in the refrigerator. They got all over him. Sure they did. Look at all the blood. He got this far and then... Hello and goodbye. Something else happened. What? She was terribly afraid she knew. The leeches were a part of it, and they had driven Patrick into another part of it, much as a panic-maddened steer is driven down the chute and into the slaughtering pen. Get out of here. Get out, Bevy. Instead, she followed the grooves in the earth, holding the bullseye tightly in her sweating hand. At least get the others. I will, in a little while. She walked on, following the grooves as the ground sloped down and became softer. She followed them into heavy foliage again. Somewhere a cicada burred loudly and then unwound into silence. Mosquitoes lighted on her blood-streaked arm. She waved them away. Her teeth were clenched on her lower lip. There was something lying on the ground ahead. She picked it up and looked at it. It was a handmade wallet, the sort of thing a kid might make as a crafts project at Community House. Except it was obvious to Bev that the kid who made this hadn't been much of a craftsman. The wide plastic stitching was already coming unraveled, and the bill compartment flapped like a loose mouth. She found a quarter in the change compartment. The only other thing in the wallet was a library card, made out in the name of Patrick Hockstetter. She tossed the wallet aside, library card and all. She wiped her fingers on her shorts. 50 feet farther on, she found a sneaker. The underbrush was now too dense for her to be able to follow the grooves in the earth, but you didn't have to be the pathfinder to follow the splashes and drips of blood on the bushes. The trail wound down through a steep break. Bev lost her footing once, slid, and was raked by thorns. Fresh lines of blood appeared on her upper thigh. She was breathing fast now, her hair sweaty and matted to her skull. The spots of blood led out onto one of the faint paths through the barrens. The Kenduskeag was nearby. Patrick's other sneaker, its laces bloody, lay marooned on the path. She approached the river with the bullseye sling half drawn. The grooves in the earth had reappeared. They were shallower now. That's because he lost his sneakers, she thought. She came around a final bend and faced the river. The grooves went down the bank and led ultimately to one of those concrete cylinders, one of the pumping stations. There they stopped. The iron cover capping the top of this cylinder was a little ajar. As she stood above it, looking down, a thick and monstrous chuckle suddenly issued from beneath. It was too much. The panic which had threatened now descended. Beverly turned and fled toward the clearing and clubhouse, her bloody left arm up to shield her face from the branches which whipped and slapped her. Sometimes I worry too, Daddy, she thought wildly. Sometimes I worry a lot. 7. 4 hours later, all of the losers except Eddie crouched in the bushes near the spot where Beverly had hidden and watched Patrick Hockstetter go to the refrigerator and open it. The sky overhead had darkened with thunderheads, and the smell of rain was in the air again. Bill was holding the end of a long length of clothesline in his hands. The 6 of them had pooled their available cash and bought the line and a Johnson's first aid kit for Beverly. Bill had carefully affixed a gauze pad over the bloody hole in her arm. "To tell your parents you got a scrape when you were skating," Bill said. "My skates!" Beverly cried, dismayed. She had forgotten all about them. "There," Ben said and pointed. They were lying in a heap not far away, and she went to retrieve them before Ben or Bill or any of the others could offer. She remembered now that she had put them aside before urinating. She didn't want any of the others over there. Bill himself had tied one end of the clothesline to the handle of the Amana refrigerator, although they had all cautiously approached it together, ready to bolt at the first sign of movement. Bev had offered to give the bullseye back to Bill. He had insisted she keep it. As it turned out, nothing had moved. Although the area on the path in front of the refrigerator was splattered with blood, the parasites were gone. Perhaps they had flown away. "You could bring Chief Borton and Mr. Nell and 100 other cops down here and it still wouldn't matter," Stan Uris said bitterly. "Nope, they wouldn't see a frockin' thing," Richie agreed. "How's your arm, Bev?" "Hurts." She paused, looking from Bill to Richie and back to Bill again. "Would my mom and dad see the hole that thing made in my arm?" "I don't think so," Bill said. "Get ready to run. I'm going to tie it on." He looped the end of the clothesline around the refrigerator's rust-flecked chrome handle, working with the care of a man defusing a live bomb.